All right. Welcome to this very special edition of the Robotics Colloquia. This 26th edition brings a distinguished group of robotic researchers that include Regina Basie, Wolfram Burgrad, Raja Shatila, Peter, Paolo, Sami, David, Vijay, Cecilia, Yoshi, Daniela, and Stefan Shaw. In fact, we wanted to have much more as our field and the area of robotics is growing and becoming richer and richer in the sub areas and the research ongoing. Unfortunately, within the 90 minutes of presentation, it would be very difficult to include more representatives. But in fact, here we have a group of multidisciplinary researchers in many aspects of robotics. So I'm very excited and looking forward to the discussion. This discussion will bring challenges in robotics that we feel important and critical to the development of robotics. Well, one of the things today about robotics is this major transition robotics is seeing. That is, we are moving beyond the manufacturing applications. We are taking robotics to the real world of unstructured environment. So as we look at applications where robotics is coming to help people and the environment, looking at applications in healthcare, in wellness, in assisted living, assisted work, sustainable nutrition, a green planet, and all the challenges of remote environments, we have indeed many challenges that takes robotics much closer to human, much away in the real world of challenges that are so different from those we have had with manufacturing. So the idea of thinking about those challenges is something that our community has explored. And in science robotics, there was a really important list of challenges for the progress of robotics. And this list includes both fundamental issues as well as enabling technologies that are critical to robotics, but they are mainly pursued by other engineering communities. So this colloquium is going to focus on those fundamental challenges that we feel needs to be addressed by our community. And these challenges are about robots with characteristics that relate to many of the things that our field looked at for many, many years, I believe 60 years. So one of the first things I remember when we talked about robots was versatility, the ability of the robot to generalize interactivity, the amount of autonomy we're building in the system, the robustness, the safety, how difficult it is to program this robot and how intuitive the interfaces to the robot are, how human-friendly the robot is, and how critically issues in ethical and the societal impact are being addressed. Our team here brought a large number of important challenges. And what we have tried to do was to, in fact, cluster those challenges in 3 categories. And these categories are related to the capabilities, the methodologies, and to the systems. So the first area of challenges in capabilities bring the questions about perceive, how a robot can perceive, plan, and reason, navigate, manipulate, and locomote, and how we interact and communicate, and how we learn while generalizing, and how we decide and act ethically. So the first set of challenges are going now to be discussed, and I'm going to start inviting our colleagues to that discussion. And the first item that we have is related to perception. And I would like to invite Peter to comment on this one. Peter?
Thanks very much, Osama. It's a wonderful collection of problems that we have to discuss this morning. Look, I think that for robots to be ubiquitous and competent, which is what we all wish them to be, it's what we all dream of, then they need to understand the world in which they're operating. And the lesson from biology is that all biological systems or animals have got the ability to perceive, model the world so that they can perform competent actions within that world. And in our own case, we devote a third of our brain is devoted to processing visual signals that we receive through our eyes. And so other large parts of our brain are involved with navigation and so on. So biology has certainly figured out that vision is the most effective way to understand the world. And that leads to the amazing competence, dexterity, versatility we see in animals. So I don't think there's any debate that robots need to be able to see, to understand the world around them. And if we think about the classic robotics paradigm, if you like, of sensing, planning, and acting, it's very classical, but it's a great way to, it's a very important taxonomy for our field. Then sensing, perception is at the beginning of that pipeline. Everything else depends on the quality of the information we can gather about the world. And it's a very old problem in robotics. It probably goes right back to the beginnings of robotics research. Our colleagues in the computer vision community have made enormous progress in computer algorithms to understand the world through imagery. And I think one of the most revolutionary steps was this deep network called AlexNet, famous paper from 2012. So it's 10 years old next year, which first applied deep learning to the problem of understanding images. And it was a step change above the performance of everything that had come before it. And in the 10 years since, people have finessed it and refined it and built networks with more layers and applied more computing power to it. And we have quite high levels of performance. The limitation at the moment is that what we're looking at is still supervised learning. So with very large sets of labeled data, we can get quite high levels of performance. But I don't think that this is an approach that's going to scale. And I don't think it's an approach that's going to give us the robustness we need for robotics. In computer vision, if you make a small error, you misclassify a photograph, it's no big deal. If you're a robot and you misclassify an image and you take an action based on that misperception, then the consequences are much more significant. So I think we need to move beyond supervised learning. Unsupervised learning is going to be important. We need to deal with the open set problem. How do we interpret a picture of something that we've never ever seen before? How do we know that it's a new thing and don't try and match it to an old thing? I think we need to bring to bear some human concepts of perception like context. In particular contexts, we expect to find particular things. It provides us a set of priors, which makes it easy to understand the world. So how do we figure the context that we're in, and how do we then use that context to simplify the image interpretation problem? The notion of surprise is important. We are surprised. It's a small learning moment for us. How do we give robots that same capability? And how do we get robots to share their surprise? One robot has a novel experience. How does it communicate that to other robots so that they all improve their models? How do we test deep networks that have been deep learned? And that's really important for trust, right? And how do we do unit testing? If I have a network and I train it with a bit more stuff, how do I know that it hasn't forgotten something else that I trained it on last week? Right. Introspection, explanation, these are all the big challenges I think that we faced with perception today.
Yeah, well, not to forget that when we talk about perception, also we include tactile perception and other modality of perception, perceiving the environment and their connections with the with the action and the active perception and all these other aspects. Maybe I should just list all the different areas in this challenge so that we have a global picture about the capability challenges that we have. And next, we're going to discuss navigation, and we're going to discuss after that the manipulation challenges, as well as the interaction and communication between robots, among robots, and with humans. We need to also think about the autonomy in terms of how we plan and reason. And we need to bring more discussion about how to generalize when we are doing learning and how we transfer to other platforms and domains, and how we're going to make sure that our decision and actions are sound and ethical. So following the presentation, the discussion about perception, I would like now to invite Wolfram to discuss how we can navigate. Wolfram.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you, Peter, for this fantastic introduction that leaves me almost without argument. So I could basically repeat what you said. It is has been an enormous list of topics that we actually need to investigate in order to solve our problems. And I completely agree with you. So, I mean, you could phrase navigation as a sub-problem of robotics because it is just like one task that a robot needs to do. And on top of that, you could come with the argument, and I had several colleagues in this panel saying this in the past as well, that navigation or SLAM is a solved problem. Right? But I want to challenge you about this, and I want to pick up on that what Peter actually also mentioned. So in fact, what we have been doing over the past 20 to 30 years in robotics is we solved the navigation problem towards an extent that we now have actually almost products in the market that can autonomously navigate around. Let it be your vacuum cleaner, and let it even be autonomous vehicles that navigate around. But what those vehicles require are prior models. Speaking of basically maps, models of their environment that help them to localize, that assist them in perception, localization, and all kinds of tracking and all kinds of other aspects. And of course, these systems fail whenever those priors are wrong. And you can see this in various documentations where you basically see self-driving cars getting stuck in construction zones and so on and so forth. And that comes up, raises the question of how can we actually solve this problem? And I think this is an area where we as a society have not put a lot of effort into, namely that question, how can we solve with the dynamics of the environment and how can we adapt ourselves? And there are basically two ways of approaching this. One would be to come up with this concept of lifelong mapping, updating your internal models to actually reflect the true state, and doing this in a mostly effective way. We do not have a nice mathematical formulation for this as we do have for the SLAM problem, but I think there is a way to formulate this, and I'm actually waiting for our society to come up with stronger methodologies in that direction. But there's also another way, and this is why I completely agree with Peter, that we could maybe, if only our perception is strong enough, that we can completely get rid of our prior models. And basically, these accurate SLAM models that we are using in robots, and basically having the ability to understand the world in the way Peter described it, enabling the robots to actually navigate around robustly. And also, and we will have like other people talking about this as well, like if you can just tell the robot, please go to the kitchen and get me a cup of coffee, to the robot being able to understand the world, understand the environment, knowing what things are, being able, and also processes, and having all these semantics behind this, And this extends a little bit more to a little bit more than vision. This is my only counter argument against Peter. There might be additional sensors like heat sensors to understand as to whether the coffee is, if the water is actually hot. There might be tactile sensors. And there's all these perceptual apparatus that we have. Even our skin is a super complex sensor, if you want so.
Right.
And if we can deal with this and enable robots to navigate around and work in our environments, like without prior maps, without prior models, then we solved many of the problems and even the navigation problem. Thank you.
Wolfram, thank you very much. Peter and Wolfram already solved the coffee problem and addressed how we can get our robot to do that. Actually, I mean, these are broader challenges that cover. So what Peter is talking about is really the whole perception in the robotic system that involves many different sensory modalities, and that brings us to how we can handle physical interaction. And how we do that, we do it with manipulation under many constraints. So I would like to invite Vijay to discuss manipulation broadly as well. Vijay?
Thank you, Usama. It's such a pleasure to go after Peter and Wolfram, because in some sense, they've outlined a lot of the fundamental challenges. But on top of that, when you want to manipulate objects, you want to pick up objects like that cup of coffee or interact with the physical world, there are additional things you have to worry about. So I would claim that we have all the challenges about reasoning about the world, perceiving the world and reasoning about it, and also navigating in the sense of trying to figure out how to place yourself relative to the object. And the only thing I would add is the perception, and I might disagree with Peter, that perception is the beginning of the pipeline, but oftentimes the perception task is defined by the manipulation task. So in some sense, you want to have the right abstractions for manipulation in order to do perception. But you know, it's really interesting we're talking about this because as Usama pointed out, robotics is about 60 years old. The first robot was a manipulator. And I would argue that perhaps this is the field where over 60 years we've made the least progress. Yes, we have better materials, amazing nanostructured surfaces that allow you to grasp amazing objects with strength to weight ratio. Same thing with actuators. I think we've never had better actuators before. Amazing strength to weight ratio, more dexterous hands, techniques in deep learning being used to understand how to grasp objects. But yet, today you look at applications, and even in the laboratory, only in the most carefully structured environments and with special purpose hands can you do manipulation. So I would ask you, why is that? Well, fundamentally, if you look at mathematical models, they're non-smooth. You're either going from contact to no contact to contact, or stick to slip, or the other way around. And sensing these transitions is really, really hard. Even though we have great sensors, even though we want to make our fingers soft, sensing is really hard, and reacting to these transitions is even harder. I would also claim that this is one area where, again, deep learning has made amazing progress in perception and navigation. But this is one area where I think there are fundamental limits. Why? Because deep learning fundamentally is a very difficult problem involving stochastic gradient descent techniques. Well, the minute you have to compute gradients, you have to somehow think about smoothness. To come up with smooth abstractions that are meaningful in unstructured environments, either for walking or for grasping, is really hard. Now, I'm not giving up hope. There are amazing researchers doing amazing work, but to me, this is clearly an important problem. And I'll argue, no pun intended, the problem with maximum impact. Because at the end of the day, robots have to do physical world. And unless you contact the world, unless you interact with the world, you're not going to be able to do physical work. Thank you, Usama. Back to you.
Well, thanks, Vijay. You're showing the connection. When we talk about every challenge, and you see its connection to everything else. And perhaps there I would add the mechanism itself. And the hardware itself, how it delivers those mathematical models you have, and how it makes use of all the sensory information provided. But we will have more time for discussion a little later. And I would like now to invite my dear Daniela to talk about this idea that is really critical in as we start to have multiple robots interacting with people and interacting among themselves in terms of that intuitive interaction and communication. Daniela?
Sorry, I lost my mouse. Thank you so much, Usama, and it's so wonderful to be here. It's so great to see everyone, and I'm very happy to build on what Peter, Wolfram, and Vijay have said. In fact, Vijay pointed out that the first industrial robot was built 60 years ago. I would say that industrial robotics has made tremendous progress. There are extraordinary masterpieces of engineering that perform so much better than people, but they remain isolated from people on the factory floor because they are heavy and large and dangerous and difficult to interact with. And this takes us to interaction. And I'd like to make a parallel and take you maybe 20 years back in time when computing was something reserved for the experts because computers were large and expensive and you needed real expertise in order to know what to do with them. But all that changed with a smartphone. All that changed with the hardware and the software interaction that now allows everyone to program and to compute. And so to me, the question is, what would it take to have robots that are similarly pervasive, to have robots that are these extraordinary machines that empower people and help people with physical tasks? Well, to me, it's better brains, better bodies, and better interfaces. And that connects to what everyone has said so far. But I would like to zoom in on one idea, and that is that today robots and people do not understand each other. So first of all, you have to be an expert in order to use a robot. But then if you put a robot and a person in the same environment, they don't really understand each other. And I'm sure you have seen stories about self-driving cars that are stuck in intersections because they don't really understand that the human drivers are yielding so that they can proceed. And so I believe we need new approaches that empower robots to understand the personality of the humans around them, that enable them to understand their activities and intent, and synthesize adaptive controllers. For instance, if you're in an intersection with people around you and you're a robot car, then if you notice that there are altruistic people who let you go, then you should aggressively adjust your controller to go. But if there are egoistic people who don't let you go, you should slow down. So we have access to a range of new approaches to modeling and to developing these kinds of algorithms, but we have not solved the problem. What we have is not enough. We also have access to a range of new sensors like EMGs, EEGs. We can even build sensorized clothes, and we can imagine creating new data collection tools that can help model our state and our activity. And so a concrete question is, should we consider building ActionNet, which I imagine to be a data set that will do for robotics what ImageNet did for object recognition. We can build ActionNet, we can encode everything people do in this data set, and then we can use it as a basis for not only learning about more agile robot control, but also about robot interaction with people. Because ultimately what we would like is to get machines that adapt to us rather than the other way around. And so in the process of doing that, I also would like to challenge us to consider that there is a lot to be learned from the natural world. And so how could we combine our better understanding of the natural world, the neuroscience, the cognitive aspects of the world together with our skillful engineering so that we can combine science and engineering towards building a different type of machine, a different level of robot that is more alert, more aware, more capable of understanding the surrounding environment and the interactions with the people.
Daniela, thank you so much. I very much like the point about abstraction. That is, we are still programming everything at the lowest level in all the details, like if we were programming computers at assembly language level. And we need to build those abstractions. And I think your action nets will be not only data, but it will be something that we came up with, understanding the skills that the robot needs, the capabilities, parameterized very quickly from the geometry and the perception we have. And about the natural world, I think Cecilia might add a few comments a little later. She has a very strong point, joining your point on that. Thank you, Daniela. And I think one of the question that comes always when we talk about robot is who's programming the robot and what level we're programming the robot. And I know that this brings all kind of high level representation and planning and reasoning. And I'm glad we have David waking up so early in the morning in Singapore, together actually with Cecilia joining us. So David, could you please comment on that challenge? You are muted, David, sorry.
Sure, Osama, thank you. So I think for those of us who work on planning and reasoning, the first and most important point that we should understand is to understand the role of planning in the context of the entire robot architecture. It's a connection with other components. In particular, let's take the standard sense, plan, act architecture. And this is a natural place for me to connect with what Peter started, which is to say that the perception is a starting point. Yes, it is. Then I would add to that to say that, okay, so then planning and takes a central place. It connects with both the perception at the front end and the action at the back end. Now, one thing, the most important thing we have to, for those of us who work on planning, is the important thing is that perception is never perfect. And that oftentimes that give us the excuse and to blame our colleagues in computer vision and say that, oh yeah, my plan doesn't work because we are not given the model that is perfect. But what we need to remember is that the planning, the perception is never perfect. Therefore, furthermore than that, not only that, also that on the action side, the commands that we send to the controllers for execution will never be executed perfectly. Therefore, uncertainty, imperfect perceptual input, imperfect action execution, more than that, also the imperfect models is inherent to planning. And we must keep that in mind. And make reasoning and modeling uncertainty an essential part of our planning process. And by doing that, that is the key to achieve robust robot performance. Now, I started my research in motion planning, a particular type of planning that reasons about let's say that avoiding obstacles, the computing trajectories, and so on and so forth. At one time, I had thought that if I just make my planner run fast enough, maybe I do not need a controller at all. I just need to run my planner fast and predict it forward. And over time, I learned is that that is not quite that, it's not quite true. The world, the physical world, naturally operate at the different levels of frequencies. At the highest level, we have symbols and logic. At the next level, probably I would call it the motion planning level, there are paths and the graphs. And the further down, then there are the controllers operate at the real time and the feedback and the kilohertz very, very high frequency. So we must form our planning and control model as the multiple levels of frequency and connect all of them together in order to have a robust and reliable and highly capable robot system. Finally, I would say that the important thing is that at least in the standard assumption of the planning, we assume that we have a model of planning. But where does that model come from? I wanted to argue that a lot of times people, when we talk about planning, especially planning at the higher levels, so we argue we are concerned about the computational efficiency of planning. With all the advances in algorithms and in computation power of the computers, the computation efficiency issue, I would say that is substantially addressed. The most difficult issue is, however, to come up with that model that is close enough approximation to the real world that would make our planning result meaningful and useful and robust for our robots. That's all from me, and back to you, Osama.
Thank you, David. I so much agree. I think really the challenge in today's applications is how we are able to replan quickly and how we are able to modify a plan not only for moving, but really for the whole task based on a given situation. And it seems like you are showing how this is going to connect with the capability provided to the planner, what operators we are planning with. And I think this is going to be really critical as we build capabilities that will allow the planner to plan with those autonomous lower level behavior that the robot can perform. So I think there will be more discussion on this as we continue. At this point, I would like to invite Stefan to discuss learning. I mean, Stefan, you've been in this area of robotics and learning for many years, and we would like to think about how we generalize, how we transfer across a platform, and how we are able to move to different domains. And Stefan.
Yeah, thank you first, Sama, Tamin, for the invitation on organizing this. This is fantastic. Yeah, let me go to learning. And I've been part of this field now for over 30 years. It's really getting long. And machine learning has been around in robotics for a long time, but it was under the name of adaptive control initially. Partially it's called calibration, partially it's being called SLAM or whatever it is. So machine learning has been around for a long time. People used initially neural networks, then we went to kind of statistical learning, then we went to Bayesian networks, and I think we're back to neural networks by now, interestingly. What's new? Why do we still struggle having learning robots around us and using this all and everywhere? So what's new is definitely that for the first time since about 10 years now, roughly, we can process actually perceptual data in a very different way. So vision, but also tactile perception, force torque sensing, whatever, we can fuse it, we can put it together. We get to a completely new world where, since without that perceptual input, robots can't really learn that much. They need to somehow perceive what the world is about. They can perceive it explicitly. That was the kind of older approach in life. And now they do it implicitly. In the 90s, we were pretty concerned about how to create representations which are efficient for learning. Now, actually, we start to learn embeddings in an automatic way, hopefully, embeddings which are meaningful. We don't know how meaningful they are. People try to disentangle them to make them more meaningful. And they try to make them such that they become more general for multiple domains, multiple robots. So what computer vision accomplished with ImageNet and all those kind of deep learning approaches, which create general embedding vectors, would be lovely if we could get this also accomplished in robotics at some point. There's obviously a huge amount of activity going on at this moment. How to do this with reinforcement learning, supervised learning, complicated network architectures, all kinds of tricks of the trade, stochastic gradient descent tricks, robustification and whatsoever. And it's too much to enumerate actually all what is going on. It is super exciting. And I think the embedding component is very interesting and kind of the key to making this work. But there's also a few things which we shouldn't forget. I think it's super important that we actually make use of our control toolbox. We know control, we can use it. There's a certain beauty to doing end-to-end learning. But if I know how to create control signals from a decent model, maybe I don't have to do this and I can learn into a kind of kinematic signal in operational space. Indeed, operational space control is super cool. It can, I have to mention to some, you know this. It allows us to generalize across robots and domains because it homogenizes the space in which we are manipulating. So that's actually very useful. And why not use this together with machine learning and deep learning or whatever technique you want? Perception is super important. We should use whatever we know from perception, whether it's classical or the new wave of deep learning, and embed this and really focus on perception, action, and learning together to make these robust systems. But then the really interesting component is also how to get robustness. Just showing learning curves going up is great, but the example is 95% success is fantastic in some learning networks. But if you stand up and fall over 1 out of 20 times as a human being when you get out of your chair, that's very disastrous. You will not survive. You will be weeded out by Darwin very, very early on. So that's not working. So we need to also figure out how to get to this level of really reliability and how to, have some measure of that we are safe and that this is working. So I shouldn't talk too long. It's very easy to run out of time. But I think getting all these things together and doing the best of all of our toolboxes is really one of the key components.
Stefan, thank you so much for this. And we're going to come back to learning, of course, in the methodologies and later on in the discussion. But I really believe learning is a major component of the tools now we're going to be able to use and help robotics develop. But sometimes I feel we are applying these tools in the wrong places. And I really think these tools are very powerful to bring things that many of the models that we need are not available. And hopefully the community can work together to bring learning really to help robotics, especially at those higher level of abstraction that are much harder to model. In any case, we're going to continue with that discussion, but just the last item in the capability challenges that we have is the question about how to reason, decide, and act ethically. And Yoshi, it is to you that we're addressing this challenge. Please comment.
Well, first of all, thank you, Sama and Tamim. I'm very happy to join the colloquium for celebrating the 1-year anniversary. The title or topics I have to explain is decide and act ethically. And as Usama explained, this is the one in the list, the last one in the list. But I think that this is the most important thing that we have to start move forward. We all know that the robot is going or coming in daily lives of human, and robots act among the humans and the human environment. And we know that there are a lot of progress of research in motion control and motion understanding and understanding human actions and understanding natural languages. So we have many of these important components already. And I think it is time to consider how to go into the detail of semantics. I heard semantics a few times already today, but I hate the word because it's hide everything behind. The semantics sound like human domain, but not in the domain of robots. So we have to probably gradually get into semantics and start solve one by one. And I think there are very important demand, and also we know little by little how to approach those. And I think the robots have to concern privacy of humans, and robots have to understand the conflict of interest, and robots have to be humane, and robots have to be compliant with law, and of course, ethics. So we can imagine how to approach one of this little by little. So I think it's time for us and for young generation to start thinking about making the new approaches for these problems, like the pioneers in robotics studied maybe 60 years the very difficult field of robot one by one. So I think it's time for us to think about explain the things behind the humans and the human environment, and robots have to explain why and how to do this. And this is the my problems, challenging problems in the robotics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yoshi. Indeed, its place in the list doesn't mean it's important. It is less, and I really agree with you. This is very critical aspect of the challenges that we need to address. Well, I guess we have to move to the other set of challenges that we discussed earlier, and the first of those is related to these methodologies challenges, and we are talking about representations. And I would like to invite my dear Regina, please, to discuss this representation issue.
Thank you very much for Sama and everybody else organizing this memorable meeting. I also noticed that there are some old friends in the audience, so I will say certain things with trepidation. I am a student of John McCarthy. He was the father of AI, and I know that today the word AI is thrown around in a very, how should I say, nonchalant fashion. But for John, and I accepted his premise, AI was all about representation. So for robotics, to me, the real challenge is how do we reason about physical world, which means what kind of representation can we hope for that will help us to reason about physical world. Now, Peter Cork very eloquently made a case for perception, and I certainly agree. That's all what we have, how to collect information about the physical world is through perception. But I like to remind all of us that actually observation is not the reality. It's a reflection of the reality. And to me, that is an important, very important aspect of perception, that you really don't have a complete information about the reality. And therefore, all your reasoning is kind of approximate. which of course, when it comes to navigation and manipulation, gets quite dangerous. And when it comes to even communication with people, as Daniela properly expressed, we really don't understand the intent of the human. And so we have a long way to go to deal with and design systems that will help us to interact with human, but also reason about the physical world. As some of you know, from the very early in the 70s, I realized that vision gives you only geometry. And therefore, I turned to my colleagues at LAS and got a tactile sensor, because I really was convinced that at least touch gives you a little bit better sense of reality. That's the message I want to leave here.
Thank you, Regina. And this reminds me of really good memories of John and his strong belief on human level AI in a way that was really like his flagship that always came in every discussion with him among the colleagues.
The measurements, which is really the observations, are only reflection of reality, not the reality.
Exactly. Thank you. Well, I don't know if Reja, you have a quick comment on this item as well?
Reja? Yes, thank you. Of course, Rosanna mentioned LAS, and I have very crisp memories of this issue that she mentioned. Actually, I would like to insist on one fact, which is that robotics is about action. Robots acts in the dynamic physical world, and everything is oriented toward this. Perception is oriented toward this action. Now, of course, we can perceive to act and build representations to act, and also act to perceive. This is what, for example, Rosanna was mentioning, to improve our representations. But it's all about building those representations that enable to act efficiently, to act rationally in the real dynamic world. And the representations that we are speaking about are actually what objects that we are perceiving afford in terms of action that can be carried out by the robot. You can collect hundreds and thousands of images of anything. For example, this ball. You can't see it because of the background. Now you can see it. Okay, you can collect millions of images about this. It doesn't make you understand what it is until you put something in it, and then you understand what it is. So understanding the word, this semantics that has been mentioned, is about acting in the world, because the meaning comes from what I can do, from the action. And I think that's a major issue that Rosanna has understood a long time ago. And that is still an open problem, because of course this cannot be achieved without learning, different kinds of learning, but learning in interaction with the environment, with the objects, to understand what those objects afford and what we can do. So this is how representations are actually built, through action.
Wonderful. Thank you, Reja. And to continue with the discussion, we have another important aspect of the action perception connection in terms of the communication and learning loop. And I would like here to ask, let me just to stop the sharing because we would see you all. Just 1 second. Okay, so Vijay, maybe you can give us another comment about this aspect of action and perception, but in terms of the communication learning and in terms of the feedback.
Absolutely. Firstly, again, Raja has set up the stage, and coming after Rujna, we don't have to talk about active perception anymore. I mean, this is something that completely changed the trajectory of robotics. But as Raja said, observations inform actions. And when you take actions, you get different observations. So in the context of network systems, multi-robot systems, humans communicating with robots, communication arises very naturally. So when you close feedback loops, as a controls person, I think about this, clearly communication provides information, and sometimes very different types of information than perception does. And once again, messages that you get from another robot can inform what actions you take. And what actions you take can inform what communication channels you can establish. The same thing is true for perception as well. If you have two sensors that are networked with each other, they can share information and arguably get a better performance than individuals can. I mean, this is, of course, the key idea in reconstruction. And the flip side too, again, perception can inform how to communicate. So when we think about feedback loops, especially for multi-robot systems, it's not just about perception action, it's about perception action and communication. And the challenge is, of course, in the robotics community, we haven't really thought about communication as a formal channel for feedback, channel for designing either control policies or planning policies or learning policies or even perception policies. So, to me, that's something that as a lot more is being done in the area of reliable, robust networks, particularly going from 5G to 6G, whatever the name is. But and then as you think about self-driving cars, network systems, this is going to play a huge role. So I think there's huge opportunities in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay and Raja and Regina. In the next set of challenges, I see something related to something we discussed in the colloquia several times. We devoted, in fact, a whole colloquium to it. And this is combining model-based and data-driven methods. And I would like to ask someone from late night in Europe, Sami, how about you?
Oh, wonderful topic and very challenging. And I think there's many in the field, or also in this room, who can probably contribute a lot to that. And first of all, let me also thank you, Osama, and in particular you also, Tamim, to organize this. It's really such a great round and very inspiring, I think, to hear all these wonderful and very thoughtful ideas and thoughts. So it feels a little bit that almost everything has been kind of said, but also the stage has been set for this big question that I think, especially in this age of machine learning and control, is kind of bringing us to the big question. So should we all, as control scientists, go to data-driven methods, and should we basically abandon the field of control, or should we say, let's try to really catch up and try to get the flexibility and the kind of the models into a new level that gets as flexible and adaptive, so that we can really kind of go to the level of what we have seen in perception. So all these wonderful and great achievements in the let's say more data-driven space that in the visual perception field has really tremendously made progress in robotics. So I think there's all these very fundamental questions, and maybe in the end the answer is probably that we need both ends of the world. But I think it's kind of interesting to really think that through, and many of the thoughts that Rosina was basically bringing on the table really resonated well with I think the whole fundamental question of whether we should really go the model-based, let's call it rather the classical way, or should we go the data-driven method. And it all boils down probably in the end to the big question, what is a model and what is the data and how much information is in the data, and can we complement it via models, and how can this be done in a very, very constructive way, maybe even in a formal way, so that we can bring them into one domain and express them in a meaningful way that kind of formally it becomes clear what the model really brings on the table, and what kind of complementary information needs to be acquired from the data at hand. And obviously, it also boils down to the question, what data is there and what can we basically see? And I really love the comment from Rosina about, I mean, data is and perception is not truth, right? In a way, it's just what we see in the sensory space, and it's a mapping from a physical, let's call it ground truth, towards a sensory percept that then has some kind of information content that we can use to then build models, obviously. So I think in the end, it really has made tremendous progress in the, let's say, bottom-up initiatives about designing robots, controlling them. I mean, coming from manipulation, we have heard, unfortunately, Vijay is right, of course. So manipulation seems to be pretty tough, and it's one of the oldest robotics problems, but their models have really kind of paved the way of progress. That's kind of the interesting way, I think, there. In contrast to perception, or let's say at least exteroceptive perception, where we have heard the last 10 years, lots of progress have been made. So, and I think what would be really interesting to kind of a domain of answering and kind of bring a bit more lights into how exactly do we combine that, would actually be the question of, can we actually tackle this grand challenge of visotactile manipulation? So can we really bring exteroceptive information and interoceptive information, I mean, force torque sensing, tactile information and visual perception together? And is there kind of a way of bringing this into one unified representation and maybe that's a control and learning framework that really leverages both information sources optimally? And I think what is also an interesting question, obviously, is how do you kind of constructively hypothesize about models? I mean, could there be a way that we don't need all our knowledge, you know, kind of expert knowledge to write down the right models that are informed, that are kind of clear, what do we want to model? So we put all this information in there, but is there a way to basically automatically generate models, reason about them, and then also complement with the sensory perception that then can basically either be kind of the system identification question, but also the complementary question of kind of adding information to the models that we are kind of trying to learn about. And I think what is also extremely important in this question of modeling and data-driven methods is there a way to really bring these two worlds together such that it really becomes more than just an integration question, but really constructive algorithmic perspective? So, I mean, maybe on the physical models, I think we can explain this a little bit better. I mean, if you think about robot dynamics, then obviously we all know that robot dynamics resides in a certain manifold space of SPD matrices in some of the sub-matrices we have there. So we can actually describe manifolds that are constraint-free, right? So it's a fundamental manifold space in which our systems reside. And then I think the big question comes, can we actually find data spaces and sensory spaces that basically complement that and really make it possible that we can have the models fundamentally there in the right space, the sensory perception coming in there, so that then essentially they naturally fall into place. So it's not an either or, but it actually comes into one place. And I think it would be really cool to kind of think that further, and it relates obviously very much to what Stefan had to say about the embeddings. So, and I think it would be really one of the grand challenges.
Oh, Sami, we lost your sound. We lost your sound. You pulled maybe the cable.
I pulled the trigger. Yeah. Do you hear me?
It wasn't me.
Great. Great. So maybe let me just repeat the last sentence, because it was anyways the last thing I wanted to add, because I really want to close the loop to what Stefan was saying about the embeddings. So I really think that this was a very important thought, that the embeddings in which the respective models reside, they need to be complemented with the right data, and then the understanding of what is explained by the model, what about the data, and where do they overlap, so that they become a more informed kind of interpretation of the real world instead of only one of the other being used. And that's kind of my very short overview on that. But I think it's many things have been said that kind of complement this.
Sami, thank you very much, and especially I know you are closer to the real world than to machine learning, so I didn't ask that question to Stefan. I know Stefan has a lot to say about this as well. I think one of I mean, the conclusion from the discussion here, data-driven and model-based, is that often these are pursued in different communities that do not really communicate and work together. One of the things that we really need from data is an understanding of strategies, abstractions that can allow us now to integrate those with the models, and that comes back to the biggest challenges of how we make and build abstractions. In any case, I would like to move to the next topic, which is, let me share it with you. I'm going to. So this is another important topic related to understanding human behavior and including the different aspects from motor to cognitive skills. And I thought Paulo might help us with this, and then after that we can go to the other issues related to simplifying principle and sustainability. So Paulo, would you like to comment on the human behavior understanding?
Yeah. First of all, thanks a lot to Osama and Tamim to organize such an inspiring event, and thanks to all my colleagues. It's fantastic. I'd like to start with a little bit of history on that. You know, I started working in robotics from the mechanical and biomedical engineering domains, actually. So I came from the area of human, and so especially human behavior. And actually the first activity, the first research that I did was about the sense of touch. And this is a very, very important way. At that time, when I started doing that, very few people, very few researchers were involved in that area. While this is really, still is a very, very rich domain of understanding of human behavior, is a very, very important way by which humans interact with the world physically. After that, I started integrating touch with vision. At that time, I started working with Regina, with Giulio Sandini, and this idea of using the vision to guide touch came as another very, very important tool for analyzing human behavior and, of course, robot behavior. And then I would say the next step was to use this kind of information, sensing, to manipulate. Now, today, I think the problem can be sort of reversed from what I started to do. And I believe this is the challenge. So the first is about sensing vision, mostly, but not only. And then perception. You know, perception is an extremely sophisticated way of that humans use to reason. And I would say that in that domain, we learned a lot from neuroscience. This is something that happened in the last 20 years. The contribution and the role of neuroscience in analyzing behavior. At the beginning, many of us were sort of observing behavior, trying to just take inspiration to imitate this. But today, the challenge is to go in depth into that and to use the neuroscience understanding of the very essence, for example, of perception, leading to something that, in my opinion, is one of the big challenges. That is the role of prediction. Prediction is a feature of biological systems that is very, very little developed in robotics, whereas I believe should be much more deeply investigated. Predictive sensory motor coordination, as suggested, for example, by Alain Berthoz, who is a fantastic neuroscientist, very much interested in robotics, is a very, very insightful sort of inspiration for us. So prediction, that is, prediction, in fact, is like speculating on the consequence of actions. Is a kind that is really something that we use a lot, and animals use a lot. And then after prediction comes anticipation. That is another very, very key behavior of humans and animals. But then at the end comes contact. So this is why I was looking back, to the origin of this. So things like we are now experiencing in Europe the football games. It's fantastic to look at the predictive abilities of the goal kicker, the penalty kicker, and of the goalkeeper. Like in the predator or in the prey. So these kind of behaviors, in my opinion, are absolutely key for, challenges for robotics.
Yeah. Well, Paolo, thank you very much. And this is a great transition to the next challenge. Prediction is so critical for human. Humans do not have the same capability of feedback as machines. We can go to kilohertz. Humans are very limited. And human developed those abilities in ways that allow them to interact with the physical world in real time, putting different hypotheses and being able to react very quickly. But from human, we can learn a lot. And there are so many interesting principles that came from many of those reactive behavior and responses of human. And I believe Cecilia is going to transition to that question about simplifying principle. Cecilia?
Yeah, thanks Usama, thanks Tamim for putting all this together. It's amazing the richness of the challenges that we see in robotics. So we want our robots to be able to do many things. We have seen many capabilities we want into them, but how to put all this together. So as someone was saying just now, how can our brain put all this together? Because we think our robots are complex, but actually living beings are far more complex than any of our robots in terms of a number of degrees of freedom, in terms of receptors that living beings have. What I think is a big challenge for robotics is to understand how we can manage all the richness of the incoming information and the richness of the motor capabilities of our robots in environments that are complex environments. So not the typical structured environment of industrial robotics. And I think that the big challenge is to try to understand and elucidate all those simplifying principles that we find in nature, we find in brains. In neuroscience, this is called simplexity by Alain Berthoz that Paolo just mentioned. Simplexity is a very nice word because it's not simplification. So we should not simplify the robot, which is what happens because actually our robots, I mean, even if they're complex to us, they're a rough simplification of a living being. And we shouldn't simplify the environment, which is what we do with structured environments. So we should keep the complexity of the system, the complexity of the environment, but then where are the tricks to make them work together, I mean, effectively, but also smoothly, and also, I mean, fast, because velocity is also important in real world. So again, the brain has many of these tricks. Prediction that Paolo mentioned is a very powerful one. We have some mechanisms for filtering the information that we have to process at a given time. We cannot listen to all our receptors together and process the inputs of all our receptors at any time. Of course, there is also an important part of an important role of the body itself. We should be able to use better the part of, let's say, control that the body itself can do by just its physical interaction with the environment. So of course we need to put some compliance in our robot to make them compliant, soft to better use this possibility. So I think this is actually one of our main challenges ahead. So trying to elucidate all these simplifying principles. There are many. It's not so easy to, I mean, to just find them out and put them together and put them into our robots. But this is a challenge that can really bring our robots to have a more effective behavior in our natural environments, I mean, human environments, and to be really helpful in our real world tasks.
Cecilia, thank you so much. This is a very important point indeed, and there is one last point in the methodology challenges, and I'm going to ask Raja. Raja, this is the question about sustainability in terms of environmental, economic, legal, social, and ethical issues. Please.
Wow. Thank you, Usama, and thank you, Tamim. What a program! You know, the sustainability is something important for life. Life, of course, has to adapt to its environment, and it cannot develop, it cannot flourish if it's not respecting its environment. And sustainability is really a key issue here. So when we are speaking about robots and robotics, the question is first to those who design those systems, us, those who use those systems. It's our responsibility, of course, to build systems that are sustainable, that respect the environmental constraints. Otherwise, they will not last. Environmental constraints, energy energy is not something that is here for free. You have to produce it. You have to find renewable sources. Otherwise, we will not last long. I mean, my main message here is that it's not a choice. It's mandatory that we build sustainable systems that respect energy consumption and environmental constraint. This goes back to material itself, from which the robots are composed. And there is, of course, a lot of work on new materials, on soft materials, on materials that are not actually consuming the rare ores that we have, the consumption of energy. And this goes back to design, of course. It goes back also to control. It goes back to the decision-making processes and the perception processes, because all this is energy consuming. So we need to have this global perspective for sustainability. Robots is are also part of the solution to that, because they can help and through robotics technology, we can help also address climate change issues and also biodiversity issues, in agriculture, in also respecting the marine environments, for example. You know this very well, Usama. So it's up to us, designers and users of this technology, and this comes to economical and legal and social and ethical aspects that you have mentioned, because it's our own ethics, and Yoshi mentioned this before, our own ethics in the design of those systems and the deployment of those systems to respect our environment and to build a sustainable future.
Thank you, Reja. Thank you very much. And I see we have many questions on Slido, and also we still have a number of challenges to discuss on the system side. So I would like to just go first on the challenges we listed here. And these are the following. One related to designing robots for the future of applications and for advanced capabilities. The second one is about the robustness, and both in hardware and scalable algorithms in the software. And the question about programming, this is really a major problem that needs to be addressed. And in addition, we have the questions related to human-robot interfaces. These are going to be more and more critical in many of the applications, as well as the architectures issues. So first, I'm going to invite Sami to talk about design for advanced capabilities. Sami?
All right, yeah, so this is quite a challenge, I must say, systematically design a robot. So I think anyone who has ever designed a robot that knows there is a lot of things and not all of them are very systematic. So, but I try to give my thoughts on how can we actually go towards, let's say, systematic design. So I think what is kind of super interesting about robotics is the magnificent creative process about it. So we see all these wonderful designs, I mean, ranging from, I mean, all the classic industrial robots to the amazing robots we see in Daniela's lab, for example, which are kind of spanning such a diverse set of not only applications, morphologies, and kind of fundamental design principles, but also the very spectacular things you can do with them. I mean, from locomotion over manipulation, over pure emerging behavior that it's not even clear what they will exactly be doing at some point. So I think the very beautiful thing about robotics is that we are explorers in a way. So we design things, and there's a very creative part of that. And it's a very complex aspect, as we have heard from the many insights we just heard. I mean, it's not only the design, the mechanics, it's about mechanical embodiment, but it's also about the control, the materials. I mean, Raja was saying something about the sustainability. So how do we build robots that do not add to the horrible e-waste problems that we're facing all over the place? So I think there is this way of designing robots, and then there is this kind of very, let's say, more deductive way that comes from specifications. So we write down exactly what we want to do. Let's assume that we can do that. That's quite a challenge by design. And then we deduce somehow via whatever kind of pipeline exactly what the robots are supposed to be composed of, what's the specifications on motor level, on sensory level, on communication level, on energy level. So all these things are more coming from the specification point of view. And this is a certain kind of very rigorous way of designing with many rules and also many mathematical frameworks behind it, that basically coming down to the building principles that you can build a robot from. And then there is the very kind of maybe a bit more distant, but nonetheless, I think very attractive way of thinking about systematic robot design. I mean, can we grow robots basically? Can they basically follow a certain kind of evolutionary way so that in the end you come up with a beautiful robot design that we cannot just deduce from specifications or from our way of designing robots, but they can basically grow in a way. And growing doesn't mean necessarily biologically growth, right? I mean, it can be very thematic growth. And this is, I think, really one of the big challenges. So how do we get to this robot compiler that can kind of design robots in a very creative way? So mimic a little bit this creative process of humans, but then make it deductive in all the fundamental subcomponents of the system. And I think this is something that has been catching up the last years much more, that design, control, and also more and more, let's say at least the perception level, are more an integrated design process. So really coming towards a design methodology. And I think this is really where there's only the first steps has been taken. And now it's really the big question, especially with these new methods or with the new materials that we see in actuation, but also in the structure of the systems. And even if we go to soft robots, there it's even very, very unclear how to systematically do it and go beyond the, let's say, more the creative process. So lots of challenges and only first steps towards doing this constructively.
Thank you, Sami. I mean, the space of design is huge, but we need to explore it. And I think this is something that is really happening now in many different ways. But we need also to guarantee robustness, and we need to deal with the software and scalability of our algorithms. And I'm going to ask Stefan, how can we build an algorithm that can be scalable?
It's an interesting question, and I think many people have different answers to that. I personally, if we can get algorithm which I have some analytical understanding what they're doing, where I know that if I apply them to a much bigger system, they just scale by a factor of 2 or something like that. So I have a linear scaling. That is beautiful, but this is not the truth anymore. What can be done? So people can now simply train algorithms in the cloud and simply synthetically generate data and get around the standard scalability issues of what we used to have. So sim to real transfer, for instance, is something which has become obviously super popular. And there's many good tricks how to do this. There's also many tricks which may be less promising, like don't try to model physics to the perfect set of what you, it's almost impossible to model physics all the time accurately, but rather focus on the things which are not modelable and which can be kind of supplemented with other algorithms. Yeah, scalability. Yeah, it's really hard to say what scales and what does not scale anymore. Except if I know many people who really look like, if I throw twice as much data at the problem, do I get twice as much better? And that is a very useful thing if you can accomplish that. Doesn't work all the time. Often you need exponentially more data. That's obviously doesn't scale very well from the data-driven domain. This is where analytical algorithms are still beautiful. And I always recommend, if possible, use all the knowledge which we have from models and analytical algorithms first before you add data augmentation in algorithms, since I believe things will be much more robust and much more scalable this way.
Thank you, Stefan. Regina, you remember our colleague Lupol. He spent the early years working on programming. Regina, you're muted. You need to unmute.
Peter Cork worked with Lupol.
Yes, I know, Peter as well. But the question is to you. I mean, I think many of the things we are talking about are going to help, but how can we bring them really to help programming robots? Because I mean, from the early years and the transition to manufacturing, the way we pre-program everything, and now we are going into a new era of transitioning to the real world with even more challenges in the programming of these robots. So I would like your comment about programming robots.
Oh, well, programming roles, learning by example. I I want to take a little bit side road on this, that you gave me an opportunity to say something. And that is, frequently I hear the solution to our problems is abstraction. And I feel very uncomfortable with that because, and I think Stefan worked in this learning methods quite for many years and I'm sure he will work even many years to come. The issue of representation, at which level you want to keep the raw information, in what fashion the representation, depends on what you want to use it for. I have been thinking quite a bit, you know, on the issue of that measurements, observations is not reality. How do people deal with that? Well, people feel, and somebody said here, I don't know whether it was Daniela or somebody mentioned, that we deal somehow with errors and robustness. And how do we deal with that? Well, we have a fast processing capability, and second, we take more data of different aspects, different points of view, different focal lengths, and so forth and so on. So we work in an iterative fashion. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that that is a key in our robotic system, that because we don't have such fast processing capabilities, we replace it with a lot of data and training. But seems to me that that doesn't answer the unexpected. Mm-hmm. And you folks all talked about we need to deal with unexpected. I agree. But if it's unexpected, you didn't see it before, you couldn't learn it before, you don't know about it before, and yet somehow you know what to do as a survival mechanism.
Well, thank you, Regina. This is a very good point, I think, and also this brings us to discussing the next one, which relates to the human connection with those machines and the interfaces that we need to create. How can we build them to be intuitive and easy to use? And I would like to ask this question to Daniela.
Well, I want to build on what Regina said. I agree with a lot of her comments. I think that it's important to bring more reasoning, more semantics, more decision making, more ability to understand. Okay, Regina, I'm going to say abstractions, but in general, understand things at a higher level than physics and mathematics, than XY points, and so the challenge is, though, that when we go into symbolic representations and reasoning, we make mistakes. And then if we make mistakes, what happens at execution time? And so I think we need to somehow combine the two. We need to build a system that allows us to reason symbolically, but then when it comes to execution, we need to identify the errors and trap the errors and respond to them. So it's like, okay, so simple example, moving from wherever you're sitting to the nearest door, you don't plan every XY coordinate, which is what we do now with robots. You plan a kind of an approximate trajectory, and there are adjustments when obstacles are encountered. And so thinking about that is important. I guess with respect to intuition, there has to be a more interactive way between humans and robots. We have to figure out how to understand each other. One way is through learning. Another way is through various other higher level models, more semantic models, models that capture personality, intent, higher levels of activities.
Daniela, thank you so much. This is very important as well. It seems we're going to go for more time. We just crossed the 90 minutes, but we're going to continue. We have questions from the participant. Tamim is going now to bring some of those questions to our panel. Tamim?
Yeah, indeed. We have actually a very interesting questions, and maybe I will start with the second one. So to the panelists, so apart from more grants and talented researchers, what would best help the panelists accelerate the discovery of solutions of these challenges? Better tools? So who would like, yeah, Daniela, please.
I would just like to suggest that we connect with colleagues in neuroscience and cognitive science and behavioral science more. I mean, in some sense, understanding natural intelligence is critical to a number of the questions we have identified in perception and interaction. And so I think that we've been very good at advancing the engineering of robotics, and so it would be good to bring some of the science, where by science I really mean neuroscience, behavioral science, those fields.
So this means more learning from human and more bio-inspiration and for our field, right?
That's right. I think we also need ideas. We need new ideas. There is a lot of enthusiasm these days about using deep neural networks to solve a lot of problems, but there are also a lot of challenges about using deep neural networks. And so the question is, what other algorithms, what other approaches can we have? Because deep neural networks are decades old, and they work better now because we have enhanced computation and data. And so we can do tremendous things, but the idea is several decades old. And so, so what are some new ideas that could help us move the needle and push the envelope?
Yeah, something like neurosymbolic representations for bridging the gap between these subsymbolic and symbolic levels. One of the questions here in the chat. Please, Regina. Yes.
To what Daniela is so interesting, that we are thinking in a very similar fashion. But I suggest to everybody, look at the literature of neuroscientists. They have been making the last 20 years tremendous progress in understanding. For example, everybody believes that there are networks in your brain of neurons. It turns out that these networks are communicating very similarly as we know from other electronic networks. Not the whole, everybody communicates with everybody, but there are some neurons that are connectors to some other networks. So networks communicate with networks via certain neurons and not the whole thing. So a lot of new stuff that perhaps we can use.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't have the solutions ourselves, right, as roboticists. So we have to look to cognitive science, to neuroscience, to biology.
So Tamim,
this is the answer of the panelists. So
wait.
I have an additional point. I agree with Rosina and Daniela, of course, but we as roboticists should not work in silos. We tend to be focused on our own topic, whereas, for example, you see this panel here, you see these guys and girls, well, put them together to work on the problem, not each one on its own issue. And that would be really what will make some difference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Raja, I really think robotics also is contributing to those neuroscience studies by bringing models and experiments from robotics and algorithms. And in fact, I think this is a key point, the connection with the other communities and also among our own community. I think there are a lot of things that that probably Tamim would bring among the questions. But Tamim, let's take the last one.
We have a comment from Wolfram. Please,
Yes.
Wolfram.
Okay, please go ahead, Wolfram.
Yeah. So I just want to also like bring in this argument. People might think that this is old, but I mean, in robotics, we are often also going for the optimal things, and in nature, that's not necessarily the case. You know, so in nature, we are often like happy with sufficient solutions, and you know, in machine learning and everywhere, we are seeking for the optimum, which is also good because this allows us to become to achieve superhuman performance. But maybe we should question this as well. I don't think that we are limited with respect to our methods. Our methods are great, particularly the mathematical foundations, the optimization approaches. This is all fantastic, but I think, you know, maybe aiming for like the peak instead of like being happy with the plateau.
Yeah, thank you, Wolfram. There are, Usama, there are still very interesting questions. Maybe we take some of them, very popular questions. So, and because also manipulation is one of my, yeah, I love manipulation actually. So there's a question, how do panelists view the development of reinforcement learning in robotic manipulation? And Jian Lan is interested in especially in hearing the opinion of Regina, but I think this is also a question to Stefan and to Vijay, yeah? Please, Regina.
What was, can somebody else answer? Because I just don't have the answer.
Stefan was about to answer this question.
Stefan, yeah.
Yeah, I can happily try my best. So I think reinforcement learning is a fantastic tool to learn optimal control strategies. That's in the end what it's all about. And the progress which has been made is fantastic. The methods which have been developed are multitude and very interesting. Many people in reinforcement learning these days think more that actually the structure of your networks and the way you created inputs, outputs, and the data is actually almost more important than the algorithms which have been developed. And then there's often the question how you can get actually to true robustness. And I think Peter Beals recently mentioned in some of his postings, like, it's nice to have a learning curve which goes up, but it needs to go up enough to get to real performance. And we're lacking still, I think, in machine learning and reinforcement learning behind what people have accomplished in computer vision and natural language processing with deep learning. So it's still a developing field. And again, I believe bringing together lots of different techniques, including good control, good perception, and then good deep learning and reinforcement learning. And only if you max out on all of those things, you will actually get really good performance at some point. But robotics is an annoying field. It's very cross-disciplinary. Just maxing out on one thing does not solve the problem.
All right.
Okay, last question. So Peter volunteered also to answer the question. So with all your experiences, what specific and practical advice would you give to an undergraduate student who hopes to become a roboticist?
Very good question.
I'd say you can start your journey, I think, either as an engineer or a computer scientist, right? And they're generally two different faculties at a university. If you're a computer scientist, I think you should try and take in some engineering units and maybe some biology or neuroscience units. If you're in engineering, you should try and do computer science units. I think that that's really important. And also take in some biology and neuroscience units. You should definitely know how to program. You should be programming in Python and C++. You should be playing with robots. You should have hobby robots. I think that's all the advice I would give to you as an undergraduate. You can do, there's many pathways to becoming a roboticist, but to do the theory, but also the practice, the hands-on stuff, really important.
Thank you. And another comment from Stefan.
super mini comment. Don't forget that this is physics, what robots are doing. Learn about physics, understand physics, appreciate physics. Don't try to overrule physics, doesn't work. Physics is all what matters, continuous math and physics.
And math, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I will hand over then to Osama now to continue.
Thank you, Tamim. We are rushing everything. Sorry, but just to the student, I think build the foundation and build on top of that foundation. Don't rush to the upper levels directly.
And a little bit of statistics doesn't hurt.
Yes, of course, but very often we forget to build the mathematical, physical, computer science foundations. Actually, this is really a great transition because I have one more challenge. We examined 19 of them, and the next challenge is this one, and it's a challenge that I think it's really critical, bringing us to thinking about the whole community in robotics. And this challenge, I'm calling it the interdisciplinarity challenge. So in robotics, we have many sub domains with fantastic development taking place in those different research areas, taking us from sensors, modeling, design, architecture, manipulation, perception. We discussed many of those. But what is clear is that if we come up with a new sensor, it will affect completely the behavior that we are going to use in manipulation, that affect completely the strategy and requirement for perception for that different strategy that we're coming up with, and that modifies our way and improve our way in planning. There is interconnectivity between all these different domains, and unfortunately we are unable to bring us to work closer. Everything is overlapping, and there is a way to think about it, probably from the point of view of what is this connection that we are building between perception and action. And for me, I think this connection that connects robots and human to robots is really a collaborative frequency layered architecture. That was mentioned before about the frequency understanding of what, where, and in what part of the spectrum of frequencies we need to work. If we're working with the mechanism, we need to communicate and close the loops at high frequencies. And this connection means the perception at lower level is sort of estimation. We don't have time even to think about the features that will be needed at higher level in the skills or the world models. So a lot of data, wide range of data that is narrowing up to representation and symbols and things that can run much slower. And these are connected to in a way where reasoning and planning is not about detailed motion and trajectories, but rather about feasible actions that we rely on the other layers to handle in their skills and through their capabilities. So, and the human is there, and that is the interface that finally allow us to develop and build the functional autonomy. And still we are relying on the human interface to perform all these different tasks. So I really believe every one of us sees part of this. The problem is not that perception is one representation. It is several layers of representation for different needs, but the representations are critical there. The actions are not simple move actions. They are actions, there will be actions at multi-layers that will facilitate and connect with the reasoning and planning. All of these areas are overlapping, and this is our challenge. How can we bring us to connect and build all these different connections so that finally we start to address the challenges that we considered here into the capabilities, methodologies, and systems. 20 challenges we have. So I would like at this point to just go through the different participants to summarize the highest points in those challenges in their own view before concluding this colloquium. I really think this was an amazing, rich gathering of ideas, and I really hope we will be able to meet in person with all the participants in the coming month and years to further evaluate and discuss our challenges and bring the community all together. One of the interesting things about the effort of IFRR from the beginning has been that at its flagship meeting, ISRR, researchers from control, researchers from perception, researchers from design are meeting and working together and discussing together throughout the meeting. So Regina was always there, and there was Bernie Roth, and there was Mark Rabert, and everyone was part of that discussion and building that community for robotics. And this is what I'm missing, and this is what we really need to bring together, not to have separation that prevent us from those amazing interactions that helps moving the field forward. So I'm going to go by the order I see on the screen, and I'm going to ask Cecilia first to make her comments, and by the end of the comments, I think we will reach the maximum ever time for a colloquium that we have organized. So Cecilia, please, you're muted.
Very, very shortly, simplifying principles to have our robots as complex as they need to be to work effectively and smoothly and fast in real-world environments.
Stefan?
Yeah, I'm standing for learning, and I think machine learning, it does and will even more play a super crucial role in robotics. What is important is machine learning allows really sensor-rich processing, which we couldn't do before, and allows us also sometimes to lose the understanding we have about what is being learned. But I would always caution people to occasionally go back to what we know and just build around what we know, rather than just trying to learn everything, which most likely doesn't scale to other systems so easily.
Thank you, Stefan. Tamim.
Building humanoids, right? So actually building complete systems that can predict, act, and learn from humans. But complete systems in terms of software and hardware with fully integrated compositional architectures. The last point on the system challenge, which we didn't discuss today.
Well, we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Sorry. But you are pointing to that other point as well. David, thank you, Tamim.
For planning, to connect planning to perception, to connect perception to connect the planning to action as well, and to account for uncertainty in our planning and reasoning process, and also that to connect planning to learning, to build robust models, to learn robust models for planning.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think we need to connect planning to action through representation of action that are powerful and move beyond just move. Learning trajectory doesn't help. We need to learn strategies. And I fully agree with this point. And in fact, this has been the point in robotics for almost all the 50 years I've been looking at this field. Sami.
Very short and quickly. So I guess one of the main questions I ask myself is, what are the robot systems, meaning total systems, which is, by the way, a moving target, I guess, that allow us as a robotics field to go beyond the admittedly large niche applications we have, but really become a mass commodity technology that really scales beyond what we have seen the last 60 years, and really become platforms that accelerate our entire field and make us kind of reach the next level as a scientific field as well.
Yeah, thank you, Sami. And as you know, I really believe in robotics, we need the right hardware, the right design, and otherwise we will spend a lot of time fighting with the robot rather than progressing the research. And I really appreciate the last 10 years contributions in improving robotic design and bringing more integrated sensing that will hopefully let the coming generation of researchers in the field to work more efficiently. Regina, please.
Sorry, I was replying. Well, as I said, to me, the key is to find the mechanism, how to extract the right information at the right time so that we can reason about physical reality. Mm-hmm. That is, to me, the whole mantra of our being and doing. And the second thing is to understand people, because after all, whatever we don't do it just for sake of l'art pour l'art, sake of the machine. We do it to serve the society and the people. And in order to really do that the right way, really need to be way to communicate with people. So that's what I am hoping to do still before I kick the bucket.
Regina, this is, I think, shared by all of us, and thank you so much for your thoughtful comment on our challenges. So, Yoshi, if you unmute, please.
Yes, I think the robot and robotics is going to be heterogeneous and domain specific and application specific, and that will the way to expand the field, and that is probably the future of our technology and society. And of course, interdisciplinarity is very crucial to learn about our boundaries, of course. But however, the roboticist and the robotics is like systems thinking, and important contribution robots or robotics can do is the generality and the foundation of such systems. So I think as Raja also mentioned, that we stay in robotics and make the fundamental research and development and be roboticist. That's my message.
Thank you, Yoshi. Peter?
There is a rich collection of challenges. I think that's very exciting. And if we look at what science fiction tells us the future will look like, there's such a big gap. We have a lot of work to do. The thing I worry about a lot is the complexity of robots that we build today. I think we're getting ourselves into a real mess with the software that underpins robotics. It might eventually be rate limiting. And so I think we need to learn, we need to take other approaches to teaching robots. And I think learning is going to become so important in the next decade.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. Paulo?
I'm optimistic. So I believe that in 15 years, we may have a humanoid robot, able to
Tamim will be happy.
predict.
Thanks.
I know, I said that on purpose. A companion robot that is becoming in the domain of feasibility, I think, capable of predicting, anticipating with discretion the intention of people, like a British butler. In my opinion, we are not so far from, together with what the community overall is doing, you know, the consumer electronics, the entire world, putting together these, of course, with an interdisciplinary approach. We may be on the right track.
Wonderful. It's important to be optimistic, Paulo.
I am, yes.
It's important. I am going to ask now Raja. Raja, your comments, please.
Yes, thank you. I have two comments, actually. The first one is that we should always think about the robot as a system, integrating perception, decision, action, learning, and interaction. And as a system that is going to act efficiently in the world. If you give too much importance to one part, you are going to miss your target. You have really to have this system balance approach with all the temporal constraints which are different at several levels. That's my first message. My second message is to us. We develop robots, but we have to develop them in a responsible manner. For the society, think about the impact of robotics, and for our environment, and therefore it's always a responsible design approach that we should adopt as a community.
Thank you very much, Raja. I wanted to check with Daniela, but I know Daniela had to step out for a call. Are you there, Daniela? Probably not. She's out in the call. So, Wolfram.
Yeah, what I would like to do is, what I think the real challenge is building robots that we don't need to tell what to do. Basically, getting rid of having to program robots and having to provide them with prior information and all these kind of things, and basically learning through the interaction with the world how to actually get around and live together with us. And I think, I mean, this can be like robots that can manipulate the world, that can navigate around, cars that drive around, whatsoever. But getting rid of the thought that we need to provide robots with a priori information. I think this is something that we finally, as roboticists, should get rid of.
So, Wolfram, I was thinking about what you're saying. So, you don't want the robot to go in your house and break everything to learn how to do it without breaking things. So we can have the robots learning at your house, and then we send them out to,
yes.
To the rest.
I would be happy to do that.
So really, I think the question of learning is very, very important. And I think there is a question about the time of operational capabilities that your robot is going to be ready to be deployed. And I think this is part of the challenge. I fully agree with you. We don't want to spend time programming robots. We can talk to them, we can interact with them, but they need to acquire the skills. And I think everyone in our discussion is coming to how we can build those capabilities to a level where programming becomes simpler, the interaction is simpler and more general. And the robots are doing the things that we want them to do without hurting the environment and without doing anything ethically incorrect. So I just wanted to say one word to the new researchers coming to the field. I know we have a lot of participants, and there will be many of you probably who will continue working in robotics. As you can see, there we have a lot of challenges remaining in robotics, and we need to address all these challenges over the coming years. And hopefully Wolfram, Paolo, and Tamim will have their humanoid intelligent navigator and companion, Paolo. I really like the companion concept. I still believe this is something that we need to pursue. By the way, in about half an hour, I have to go to another companion underwater, and I'm going to be joining the team to do the final experiment before sending the robot to its upcoming expedition. I wanted also to say to our community that after 26 event of the colloquia, we are now going to take a summer break, and we will be resuming in the fall. So before closing, I would like, on behalf of IFRR, I would like to thank you all for your contribution to this wonderful discussion. I would like to thank the colleagues in the technical activity board who participated in many of the events and brought so many ideas and concepts to that discussion. I would like to thank in particular someone hiding behind IFRR. David, if you are there, could you please turn it on? I would like to see you, and I would like to thank you warmly for your help in making this broadcast to everyone. I really hope, thank you, David. Here is David, the guy behind the broadcast. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I would like to invite you. I know we are in many different time zones, late in the morning or early in the morning. I would like to invite you to stay for the post colloquium discussion, and I would like to say thank you for all the questions to our participant. We haven't been able to come and answer all the questions, but it has been a wonderful journey in the last year, covering many of those topics, and all these topics are recorded at IFRR YouTube channel. So please feel welcome to look at those recording of the different colloquia that we have. Thank you all very much. Thank you.